Hi, this is Charlie Donnelly, author of The Girl Who Was Taken, and you're listening to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast. I'm Nate Goss. Today on the podcast, our interview with Annie Spence, author of Dear Fahrenheit 451, and I messed up the subtitle during our interview, so here's the full title. Dear Fahrenheit 451, A Librarian's Love Letters and Breakup Notes to the Books in Her Life. So as the subtitle suggests, Annie Spence is a librarian. She hails from the Detroit area, and she started writing letters to the books that were being discarded or taken out of her library's collection. And soon she found herself writing letters to many of the books that she'd read. And so Dear Fahrenheit 451 is a compilation of those letters. Now, how did I find out about this book? Well, there's another librarian here at Cook who enjoyed this book so much that she recommended it to the entire reference desk staff here. And let me tell you, that does not happen very often. But she was right to do so because I decided to give the audiobook a try, and it was just so funny. And it is really one of the most true-to-life portrayals of being a public librarian that I have ever read. But I really think anyone who loves reading, anyone who enjoys books, can really relate to what Annie's getting at through these letters. You know, simply put, I think what you get is that books really affect us personally. And that books are something we have throughout pretty much every stage of our life. And what we get out of these letters that Annie has written and shared is that books can fill pretty much every range of emotion in our human experience. So I reached out to Annie because I wanted to talk to her about being a book lover, being a librarian, and what it was like sharing these personal letters with the world. I was able to interview Annie from her home near Detroit via Skype, so I don't want to waste any more time. Let's just get right into it. This is my conversation I had with Annie Spence. Well, Annie Spence, thank you so much for being on the Libraries podcast, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Let's start with the concept. So this is a collection of letters that you've written to books. Now, how long have you personally been doing this, and where did the idea to make it into a book come from?
I've been doing it for my own amusement for about 8 years. One of my first jobs at a public library had a free table where they would put the books that were too beat up even to put in the book sale. And I started just writing little notes in my head or down on paper, sort of like Dear John letters to the books on that table. So I've been
almost
doing
like you felt sorry for them? Or?
Yes. Yeah, the first ones were very much, I feel sorry for you, book titles. And then it sort of grew from there.
So then when did you actually realize that this would be a good book to publish?
I worked for the Traverse Area District Library, and I had a blog, a reader blog for them, and I met an agent through that just serendipitously. I was emailing her to tell her that I had recommended one of her clients on the blog, and she looked at the blog and said, I really like your writing. Do you have any book ideas? So I said, sure. And thought of a couple, and then I added a few of those notes that I had written over the years. As a book lover herself, she thought that was a great idea, so that's how we ran with it. It was all breakup letters at first. Once we got the publisher, Flatiron Books, on board, my editor wanted me to add some love letters too, which I think was ultimately made it a way better book.
Now, had you always wanted to be a writer? Because, I mean, you're a librarian, and you're in Traverse area is in Michigan, right?
Traverse area is in Michigan. I'm in the Detroit area now.
Okay. But so you're a librarian, but have you always wanted to be a writer as well?
Yes, I was an English major, creative writing major, and I always wanted to write, but writing doesn't really pay the bills, even if you're really good at it, actually. So at the beginning of my junior year, I started thinking about other things I could do, and one of my advisors mentioned being a librarian, and it just sort of hit me like a lightning bolt, it just really matched up with my skills, and I wanted to be of use in my community, and I also wanted to be around books and convince more people to love reading.
Yeah, I actually just did a career fair last week, and it's something that I told a lot of the high schoolers is that librarianship is a good profession for when you don't know what else you want to do and you just want to help people. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I mean, not every day, but a lot of days you leave feeling pretty good about how many people you helped.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me tell you what I think is really kind of brilliant about the concept of your book. And that is that I love that what you're doing is you're reflecting and writing about the book and the book alone. So you're really not getting too deep into like author's intentions or historical context or really doing criticism at all. But with your letters, we're actually getting a really intimate sense of what your personal interaction is like with the books. So did you have to think a lot about how much of your own self to put into these letters and how much time you would spend talking about the book itself?
Yes, my editor told me, if nothing else, trust your voice. That's why we want the book. So I didn't really struggle with how much of myself to put in, unless I was mentioning other people. But I did want there to be a good balance of the reader learning what the book was about and learning its effect on me.
Yeah, and I think your voice definitely comes through on there. I mean, you're actually it's very funny. It's a very funny book to read. So now that the book is finished, do you still write letters to books?
I do not. I think I'm a little close to this book, so maybe in the future I will. I still think about my feelings for books in my head, but I haven't written any down lately.
Actually, that leads me to my next question, which I was just going to ask if you actually have written a letter to your own book.
I haven't written a letter. I guess I'd say good job, little buddy, to the book. Of course, made it. Yeah, you did it. Yay for us.
I've noticed, though, that people even on, like, say, Goodreads or Amazon, they've kind of taken it upon themselves to write letters, to your book. Do you read those? What's it like being an author for the first time and realizing that people are going to have opinions about your own book?
Sure, yeah. Writing a book of breakup letters and love notes, basically a book of my opinions to books. I can't really expect that everyone will like the book and not say anything bad. Yeah. That would be sort of hypocritical. I have been pleasantly surprised by some of the readers that have written letters to Dear Fahrenheit 451 or been inspired to write letters to their own favorite books. So that was kind of a pleasant surprise. And as far as the bad reviews, I don't really read them. My husband reads them and sort of tells me about them secondhand and tries to defend me. He does not have a Goodreads account, which is good.
Well, I mean, I actually do think it takes a lot of courage to write a book, or it's kind of risky, I should say, to write a book that's for book lovers about books. Yeah. Because you're sharing your own opinions, but those could potentially be very personal to other readers. They have very personal reactions themselves. And in fact, it was a positive review, but it was an NPR reviewer, Margaret H. Willison, who wrote about your book, quote, "You will find opinions you endorse without reservations, and you will find bones you need to pick with Spence," unquote. So I guess I'm wondering, were there certain letters or books that you were writing, when you were writing the book, that you were kind of nervous about how people would feel about maybe your unpopular opinion or just very strong opinion? Yeah,
there was sometimes that I worried that writing a letter might be a catch-22 because the biggest audience is going to be other people who have strong feelings for books. So you want to write about, you impart your strong feelings for books, but the stronger the feeling, the more likely it's going to be the opposite of the way someone else feels. One of the ones I was nervous about was Anna Karenina, because I wrote a letter to that book about how I had never read that book. And I have gotten a little pushback on it from readers. Some friends and family had said, "You really need to read that book." So like, that was a funny letter, but seriously, read that book. Right. And another one, I think I wrote a letter to the book Wicked, which was kind of a nasty letter. I didn't like the book, but I felt comfortable writing a breakup letter to that book because I was confident that so many other people did like it. So it's not like my one bad review is going to tank that best-selling book.
Yeah. Well, I suppose you're right, because honestly, if you did have an opposite feeling than I did, it was really valuable to hear that opinion, to almost kind of make me reflect on my own reasons for liking a book. The one I'm thinking of is the Giving Tree.
Oh, yeah.
The one that's like, oh, it hurt because I love that book.
That one does hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time I reread it as an adult, I was like, oh man, I really did love that book. I really gave it to a boyfriend in high school, but reading it now, you just can't take it.
You make some good points, though. It's something you have to wrestle with.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Giving Tree, I do really like that you include children's books in your collection, but that you're kind of writing from your own perspective, which is an adult's perspective. And it really hit close to me personally because I'm sort of a somewhat new father. I have 2 4-year-old boys, and I don't know how old. You talk about your son in the book. I don't know how old he is.
He's 4 as well. I don't know what I would do with 2 of them.
I don't either, actually, most days. So. But yeah, it seemed like we were kind of having the same experience rereading these books, and I really valued that. But your choices of what you reviewed, I thought were pretty spot on. You do Frog and Toad, which has to be, one of the best children's books, story collections ever written. And then the other one, though, that I thought was really funny was your one about trucks.
Oh.
Was the book just called Trucks? Was that what it was? Or
It was just called Trucks, or I Love Trucks, something very basic, and the book was very basic, which of course is good for toddlers and super boring for parents.
I think it was really hysterical and cathartic to kind of read that because we've all been there. So how did you decide which children's books to write about and how you were going to approach each one?
Well, I wanted to do a sort of smattering of the basic children's book genres. So I wanted to do a chapter book, sort of a tween novel, YA, and then the My Truck book would be like a board book, baby book. And I just tried to pick the ones that had the most impact in my life. Or honestly, while I was writing the book, there were some points where I was just like, okay, what's affecting me now? And some days it was My Truck book. Because when you're a reader, it's not just the time that you are sitting down reading those words. It's the time that you could be spending reading your own book that you want to finish.
I hear you. Yeah. You actually do bring a lot of different people in your life into the book. One of my other favorites in here was your letter to the book Blood Meridian, which you hadn't read, but that you were more just annoyed at how much your husband was kind of geeking out about it. Were you worried about bringing other people into it, or did you have to talk to them first, or let them read it beforehand? I mentioned to everybody beforehand. I write a letter to a book that I gave my niece as well. I did try to make sure that everybody knew that I was writing about them, unless it was, an offhand comment where I didn't leave their name. My husband didn't want to read the book until it was all finished. He said he wanted to read it as one piece, and I kept saying, "Are you sure?" Because I mentioned you in here, but he was adamant that he read it after the final draft had been edited. I want to switch gears a little bit and actually just talk about libraries and being a librarian. In your introduction to your book, you actually say, quote, "Librarians, please don't read this," which I believe is kind of a more sarcastic or tongue-in-cheek thing that you're saying. But what's the truth buried in that? Are you kind of self-conscious about other people in the profession reading the book?
Yes, of course. My dream would be for everyone in the profession to get behind it, or not 100% get behind it, but at least find something in there that they relate to. But I also want to make it funny and relatable for people that don't go to the library, so that maybe they would think about coming into the library. They would think of it as a little more relaxed place than some of the stereotypes are. But for sure, if there's one reader group that I want to love this book, it's librarians. So that is kind of nerve-wracking. Well,
I mean, I can speak as a public librarian that your more aside comments and observations seem to be pretty spot on. It felt kind of like it felt kind of like water cooler talk, which I think might be interesting for people outside the library to get into. But, my perspective is an insider's perspective. I'm wondering what the response has been from readers outside the library as far as their views of the library after reading your book.
It's been generally really great. A lot of people have said, "Oh, you make me want to go to the library," which is, you couldn't ask for a better response than that. I was interviewed for the Detroit Free Press up here, and the woman that interviewed me said, "Oh, just hearing you talk about libraries makes me want to go to the library again." So generally, it's been that.
I think it could be hard maybe for those outside the library to really understand how we could ever get rid of books. What we call weeding, what you call book breakups in your book.
Yeah.
But I think that what you're doing is actually really clever, because some of your letters are actually to books that you're going to be discarding in the library. And I think just by selecting a few of the really obnoxious ones, like,
Sure.
maybe the calculator book. Or,
Right.
It's like almost in the process, you're laying out this really good defense of why weeding is a necessary thing in libraries. Did you see a defense of weeding as kind of a secondary objective in your book?
Yes, quite secondary, because at first I was just trying to get a good range. I didn't want all the letters to be the same. I didn't want all the breakup and, the reasons why I loved or didn't love a book to be the same. So that sort of forced me to be more creative about the types of letters I was writing. But I did want people to sort of understand how we curate a book collection and the ways that weeding is actually a good thing. I've had patrons over the years that'll come in and say, I donated this book in 1986 and I don't see it on your shelf. Mm-hmm. Like, why did you get rid of it?
Yeah.
And we have to say, oh, thank you very much for donating that book. But, it's about, I don't know, some medical thing written in 1986. So we can't, in good conscience, keep it on the shelf.
Yeah.
I do hope people sort of get a better feel for why we weed and just in general what we do. I don't think people that just come in and see us sitting at the desk even know that we're a part of getting the books on the shelves, that we're the ones that choose those.
You talk a lot about books as objects. You're talking about physical things like the stacks. You talk about cover art a little bit. In fact, one of my favorite book lists in your book is the one that is about judging books by their cover and maybe don't judge certain books. Yeah. You talk about looking at other people's bookshelves or seeing stacks of books in bathrooms. And so how important to you is the physical book to your own reading experience?
To me, it's pretty important. I understand why people love ebooks and why they're convenient, but I don't read ebooks. I listen to audiobooks, but other than that, I'm a big fan of the print book, and I purchase books at estate sales and yard sales based on the way they look or sometimes the way they smell. I love the way old books smell. There's an aesthetic quality there as well for me.
I did the audiobook version of your book, which I should mention to our listeners is available in Hoopla, which is the library's, one of the library's apps that people can put on, and you can check it out anytime because there's no wait list in Hoopla.
I love Hoopla.
Yeah. So I've always wanted to ask this of authors. What is it like to hear your own writing read by someone else? And before you answer that, we should mention your book is read by Stephanie Spicer, who did a really good job, actually. But I am still curious about what it's like to hear your own stuff read by someone else.
Stephanie Spicer did a great job, and I actually wrote her a thank you letter after listening. But no matter how good a job she did, it was still embarrassing to hear those words spoken back to you. I was like blushing the whole time, especially for some reason, like the funnier parts. The letter I write to Frog and Toad, I use quotes from the books, and she just like listening to the sequence she read them in and the way she interpreted Toad's voice, it made me laugh, but made me blush as well.
A good chunk of your book, in fact, almost the last quarter or the last half of the book is a compilation of reading lists. And I found a lot of them to be really creative. It wasn't just your typical, like, if you like a good mystery, here's 10 mysteries. It was really, really creative the way that you put them together. And it pretty much tripled my to-read list. So I guess good job there. But I'm wondering if there's a certain list in your book that you have actually found really useful while you're on the reference desk.
There's a list in the book called How to Turn Your Lover into a Reader, and it's a list of like beginner books for all different sorts of people who say they don't like reading, because I strongly believe that there's a book for everyone. And so I would never call it that, How to Turn Your Lover into a Reader, at the reference desk. But that list and maybe unwritten versions of that list are really helpful for Reader's Advisory, because if people haven't read anything good in a while, they can't really tell you that they like mysteries or whatever. You have to base it on sometimes what movie they like or what they're doing in their lives at that point. So that list was particularly helpful to me. I had a bookseller tell me that he was keeping my book at the counter as sort of a reference for him to recommend books. So I was really flattered by that.
You know, I think it's near the beginning of the book. I'm not quite sure, but I know that in your book, when you're talking about what reading kind of means to you, and one of the things you say is that it helps you to connect with humanity. Can you maybe talk about what you mean by that exactly?
Sure. Well, I've read studies as an adult after feeling it personally that reading fiction in particular helps build empathy in people. But personally, just from a young age, I grew up in a small rural Michigan town. There was a lot of sameness, and reading books was a way for me to get out into the world. I could explore other cultures and other worlds, and it was also a way for me to connect with myself and see myself reflected in stories, and help me realize that my voice is important. Yeah.
That actually leads us to the last question that we like to ask all of our author interviews, which is, what are you reading right now?
I am reading, what am I reading? Okay, I'm reading Bastard Out of Carolina by Dorothy Allison, which is an older novel. I think it was written in the 90s, Southern fiction, which is very good. I'm reading a book of letters. Not only did I write a book of letters, but I really like to read books of letters. I'm reading a book of letters called Love H by Hetty Jones, which is letters back and forth between two women artists in the 60s and 70s. And I just finished a book by Matt Goldman called Gone to Dust, which is a sort of noir mystery that takes place in Minneapolis, which is a great winter read.
Yeah, winter's coming.
Yeah, it's very cold in the book, cold and dark, and you need something
especially
to keep
for
you
you in
occupied.
Michigan, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
All right, well, Annie Spence, it's been great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on, and congratulations once again on the book.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I hope you liked that chat with Annie. I want to thank her once again for being on the podcast. If you want to check out Dear Fahrenheit 451, you can find it by searching the catalog on our website. That website's address is www.cooklib.org. As I mentioned in the interview, the audio version of the book is also available anytime through our Hoopla app. You just download the free app on your smartphone or tablet and stream away. That app again is Hoopla. That's Hoopla. While you're on our website, be sure to check out Shelf Life. That's the library's blog, which can be found at shelflife.cooklib.org. And it's where a lot of us librarians regularly post what we're reading, what we're into. You can find all sorts of local history stories, genealogy, and also that's where you can really dig through our past archives of this podcast. If you're liking this podcast, keep on sharing it with others and letting them know that they can subscribe in Apple Podcasts or really anywhere they like to get their podcasts. And while I'm on the subject of Apple Podcasts, if you really want to help us out, one of the best ways you can do that is simply to leave us a nice rating there. And also, before I go, I just want to make sure you know that we want to hear from you, our listeners. You can talk to us anytime on Twitter. Our handle is @CookLibrary. Or you can send us an email. Webmaster@cooklib.org is where you should direct those messages. Thanks for listening. We will be back soon, but until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.